Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Sean Bacon, president of Dynamic Shift Consulting. Sean is a Canadian Armed Forces veteran who served 12 years as a paratrooper and an instructor at the Canadian Forces Military Police Academy. During that time, Sean developed a system of training that psychologically and physically prepared both soldiers and police to thrive in some of the worst situations the world has to offer. His company, Dynamic Shift, leverages his experience to work with business leaders to develop and sustain mental toughness, leadership, and team development in competitive environments. And that is really what we spent the bulk of this conversation talking about: how to build mental toughness, how to improve leadership, and how to improve team development so that we can outperform the competition in highly competitive, tough environments, or really just when the world kicks you and knocks you down. We talk about how important mental toughness is in all scenarios and really define the difference between mental toughness, physical toughness, and a bunch of other things that I think are going to be really helpful for people as they try to improve themselves, have better experiences with the people around them, and really organize and lead people toward a common cause, which is really what this show is all about. Those are the three themes that we focus on. And I think Sean had a ton to offer for people who are looking to get better in all three phases of that game. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. Here is Sean Bacon. Sean, welcome to the show. Good to see you again, and very excited to dive into the conversation today. So welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's jump right into it. I know we're going to kind of start with the topic of mental toughness here today. And this is kind of this will be a fun one to unpack. What does it mean to you to be mentally tough?
Mentally tough, it's about consistency and follow through. It's about doing what needs to be done, not necessarily what you want to do. We always gravitate to what we want to do because it's comfortable, it's safe. It's also slightly selfish. Whereas what needs to be done is about urgency. So being mentally tough is being able to focus on that, to be selfless, to go a little further, to push your boundaries, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. People talk about grit. People talk about mental toughness all the time. But when you truly meet someone that is mentally tough, it's easy to see it. We tend to admire it. However, crisis has a way of leveling the playing field. Crisis is a litmus test for both leadership and mental toughness. So it's the best place to learn how to be mentally tough is when things are chaotic, ambiguous, going wrong. It's a test of who you are as a character. Mental toughness ultimately is a choice you have to make to be uncomfortable.
I think when we think of mental toughness, a lot of the time we think of the most extreme examples, and you yourself are a high performing military veteran. You're what we think of, right? Or we think of in, kind of pop culture now, we think of David Goggins, right? Who's out running ultra marathons all the time. And we think like, well, God, I'm not like that. I must not be mentally tough, or I got to be like that. I have to be this like freak of nature who tortures myself, and like that's the definition of mental toughness.
Right.
I guess like how do you respond to that? Is that right, or should we be reframing that for ourselves?
I absolutely. It's subjective. We all have our own visions of what mentally tough is. What's that old? It's a great saying about cancer. You don't know how strong you are until strong's the only choice you have. Yeah. All of a sudden, you're backed into the corner. You're dealing with something that's so much bigger than yourself. And now you got to persevere. And cancer is a great example how people all over the world step up, push harder, do whatever they can to survive it. Now, there's great people out there like the Goggins of the world that are those extreme examples. However, mental toughness and physical toughness, all those very often go hand in hand. Sometimes they are mutually exclusive, okay? Because mental toughness is your ability to simply deal with something in such a way that you persevere. You have to go through it like a process. So when you see people like Mother Teresa is a great example. She once got sick, hospitalized, and she left the hospital to go help other people. Okay. That's mental toughness. That's going out and be above and beyond. So I think everyone has an element of it in them. They just don't always explore it until they have a need to do so. We don't make the choice when the times are, comfortable. We tend to make those choices when we don't have any other choice.
Is that fine? Like, is this something that we could just tap into at any time? Or is this something that needs to be developed?
I think it needs to be developed. And especially in our youth. Our youth is, people love to complain about X and Y, Z, sorry, not X, but Y and Z gens, and myself being an X gen. They love to complain that they're entitled, they're this, they're that. Well, that's our fault. Okay. I think it can be taught. I think it should be taught. When I work with young people, it's amazing that as you create situations where that drives the need to be mentally tough, how fast they rise to the occasion. So I think it's our responsibility as adults, mentors, coaches, parents, to give people, young people, these opportunities to test their mental resiliency, to test their mental toughness. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's what you choose to do with it on the other side. And give them those life lessons that this is an important tool in your toolbox, because life is not going to go your way. It's as simple as that. Certain things will, definitely some things won't. How are you going to deal with them? Where's your level of character and resiliency in those tough times? Because COVID is one of them.
And what does that look like? It seems to me, as you're saying that there are some pretty simple ways to do this, because it's basically just stick with itness.
Somewhat. Yeah, absolutely.
And so what are some ways that you would suggest people start to apply this as kind of an entree into this, whether it's in their own lives or as they're working with their kids? What are some examples of this?
Well, one of my favorites, and something I used with my own kids, was leveraging failure. Fail harder, fail faster. Don't be afraid to fail. We tend to lean away from failure. Number one, our ego gets in the way because we hate to look bad. And we hate the feeling of failure. But yet, leveraging failure is your ability to take that magic lesson failure gave you and leverage it into a success the next time. So we tended to celebrate failures instead of, ooh, wow, shit, you failed. Too bad, kid. Instead of, hey, what did you learn? What would you do differently? How would you attack this next time? What's the number one thing that you're going to change? And how are you going to make it right? That's my favorite question. How are you going to make it right? Because now we're tying failure to accountability.
Yeah.
Failure, solution, accountability. So what happens is all of a sudden they start coming to you going, yep, I messed up. This is an automatic. I'm not asking questions anymore. They're bringing me, this is what I realized. This is what I'm going to do next time. This is how I'm going to make it right. And it's like, oh, I'm glad we're having this conversation. Thanks. But until I built the framework for them, failure was this horrible place. So if you're going to be mentally tough, you got to be able to see the things as a lesson. Failure is the lesson. Leverage failure as often as you can. Fail harder, fail faster, fail as fast as you can, because you're going to. That's just the way it is.
I like that. There's a follow-up question here too, which is like, there's, on the one hand, there's how do we develop it?
Right.
And on the other hand, like even before we develop it, maybe it's like, how do we inspire people to even want to develop it? Because I think we all know those people who, show up and they're like, well, it's Monday.
Yeah.
And they just, something happens and their default is to kind of get through it by complaining about it. And they try to avoid as much pain in their lives as they can, or as much discomfort in their lives as they can. Like a lot of people are like that. We all know people who are like that. How do we get people to embrace the importance of mental toughness and to be willing to say, you know what? All discomfort's not bad.
Yeah. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's really about being a leader. See, managers move things, leaders influence people. So and being a leader is like, it's also being a mentor and a coach. Sometimes when you hear that, it's a real great opportunity to go, hey, you're right. It is Monday. And potentially it's going to suck, but damn, we're going to make it right. We're going to have a great day on this. By giving them the opportunity to change that mindset. We don't give people an opportunity to change their mindset. We actually have created a society where we're going, hey, it's okay not to be okay. And it is okay not to be okay. But it's also okay to rise above it as well. Recognize, have the emotional intelligence to recognize why a person feels that way, but then have the wherewithal to elevate them. See, it's a dichotomy.
That is such, and that's the conversation that I've been just like wrestling with over the last couple of years, because I fully believe that it's okay not to be okay, like you talked about. And it's great to seek out the help you need. And it's great to slow down and recover in all of that. And sometimes it's also good not to do those things and to just like pick yourself up and keep on going. And I guess, like, how do we know how to approach a situation? How do we know what the right response is? Because I think we're in this weird spot where there can be a lot of guilt associated with getting that kind of help, or shame associated with getting the help you need.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
How do you, where's the balance in your mind between like, hey, go get help, and like, hey, son, pick yourself up, let's keep going?
Well, know thyself is a great way to start. It's like knowing who you got to get out of your own way. We are so in our own way. We are living in a dichotomy of it's okay not to be okay. And yet, hey, you better step up. You have to start from a place of recognition. I'm not okay. There, bang. Say it out loud. Don't shy away from it. Some people have the personality or the ego that they can't admit that. And other people are, hey, I'm not okay and I'm never going to be okay. Well, self-recognition. Now, what is your next step? What do I need to do? For an example, I have PTSD and I go to a psychologist. Now, I won't lie. The very first few times I was not a fan because I had to rip off a Band-Aid over and over and over again until it stopped being a Band-Aid and started becoming a scar. And I think that's what we as people forgot to do. We forgot to build our emotional, psychological scar tissue. Scar tissue is just an ugly piece of tissue, but it's tough. And it's a reminder of what happened and how you healed and how you got through it. So I'm very proud of my scar tissue now, whether it's physical or mental or emotional or even spiritual. So I think we don't give ourselves enough permission to say, where's my accountability in this? How do I get myself to a better place?
I love what you said there too. No, I love what you said there too about, is this a situation now or is this permanent? Like, is it always going to be bad?
Yeah.
And I think if the attitude falls to the extreme of like, life always sucks, or this is always bad, or I always want to avoid these things, that's probably a red flag that you have the wrong attitude.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's, hey, I just need this for this period of time so that I can get back on track. I think like if you're pulling out temporarily, I think that's fine as long as you have a plan or like recognize that you have to put the car back in gear eventually.
Yeah, exactly. The difference is literally between survival psychology and growth psychology. Survival psychology is selfish. I need to survive. Usually your head is down looking at your feet. I just need to make one more step. And then as long as I get through this, I'll be okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes that's what's required. And you hear these great survival stories, and that was their psychology. That was their mindset, their attitude. But then you have to transition into a growth mindset, which is collaborative. What are we doing about it? Who do I need to talk to so I can learn to get past this? Who can I leverage that's in my circle? Because you don't stand alone. But sometimes we feel like we do. To be mentally tough is also to draw in other people that bring a measure of toughness that they can, or wisdom that can offer you something that'll help you get through it.
Well, that's a good point, because there's that perception that the toughest of us are the lone wolves. The movie hero who wanders into town alone and kicks ass and then, leaves on their own without any help. And it just seems the more conversations I have with people, like, that's nonsense.
That is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. No one is an army of one. I mean,
with your military background, like, how do they create that culture of team mental toughness?
I've had the privilege of belonging to some really great units, and And what you learn is that there's this subculture. And to get to these units, you actually have to prove yourself. You have to hit a certain standard, whether it's physical or skill set or leadership. You have to show up already being there. And then you meet like-minded people. Now, they're not all like-minded. Let's be clear. We all bring something different, and we're all from all over the nation. We all bring something different to the table, but we have one thing in common, which is the attitude. And there is something tremendously powerful about it. Belonging to a paratrooper unit, there is this attitude. It can't be done. Hey, hold my beer. Watch this. We show up. Matter of fact, the tougher it is, the happier we are, because that's the subculture that's there. And I've met other airborne units, whether it's Canada, the United States, the UK, Germany. They're like, we all share the same attitude, slight differentiations, but typically the same attitude. And that comes from the level of training we're getting. There is a degree of difficulty that is very high. That's a very high failure rate. And because of that, there is a certain accomplishment that you've passed. Everyone knows that you've passed. You've earned the place to be there. Now we all share in that. And we also delight in the diversity. True diversity is thought. Being a lot of different people together from different backgrounds and religions and gender, doesn't matter. And they're all having the same attitude, which is powerful.
Is that more an element of culling out people from the herd who don't fit that, or developing it with the people that you have, or some combination of the two?
I'd say combination of the two. Yeah, there is something about, okay, there's only certain people that can make it because the standard's very high. Yeah. However, just because you failed, once doesn't mean you can't get there. I failed several, I did selection for our special forces and I failed the first time, and it was heart-wrenching. It crushed me. But then I chose to recover because I actually tore my Achilles tendon in half. So I had to start with recovery and then retrain myself and also figure out where the holes were that I ended up in the position that I was in. So it's mental toughness is also, it's falling down, getting up, trying again, falling down, getting up, trying again. The Japanese have a saying, that's an old samurai maxim that said, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. And that's the kind of attitude these warriors and these soldiers have.
And so let's translate that to the working world, because I think there are a lot of things. I'm a fan of folks like you who are in those units. And I think there's like so much you can learn from taking the extremes, like the extreme people, extreme situations, and then you can bring it back and say like, okay, if they behave this way, if these dynamics are at play, then that'll translate to a less dynamic situation, but still hold true. But I think there is a weird element here where in like special operations, which is getting a lot of airtime now, to your point, it's really hard to get there. There's a huge selection process and most people don't make it. In corporate America, it's not so much. Like you're interviewing people, they have the skill set you need, they're good people, you're bringing them in, but they're not the baddest of the bad. They're not the toughest of the tough, right? That's not what we need in the workforce in the same capacity. And yet we want all of our people to have mental toughness, right? We want them all to be resilient. We do need to build these skills, but in a broader population where we can't just cut people who don't have them.
Right.
And so I guess how do you advise the business leaders that you work with to be developing that in some of these kind of harder to reach subcultures of their own organizations when you can't just, cut them out and focus on the people who are the most elite?
Well, that's an outstanding question, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to only 2 things. And I'm a big fan of simplicity. Faced with confusion and conflagration and chaos, simplicity will always win. So it comes down to culture and character. I often get them to focus, okay, you have your vision, you have your mission, your strategic vision, your strategic mission, not a mission statement. Let's be clear. I don't have a lot of time for mission statements. But I do believe in a mission because a mission has a successful end state. A lot of mission statements, there's no successful end state. It's sort of ethereal. What's your vision? What's your mission? Great. What kind of culture do you want that's going to cause your people to have the attitude required to accomplish this mission in alignment with your vision? So start with culture. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Is it collaborative? Is it challenging? Is it inclusive in terms of ideas? Do you have psychological safety where people can challenge you and challenge each other? Then character. Right now, there's a big shift from talent-based recruiting to character-based recruiting. Like you can have, your degree from Harvard, cum laude, but you don't have the character to do the job. Now, a person of great character stays longer, works harder, invests more of themselves, buys in, develops teamwork, tends to become a great influencer within the group, tends to be a great follower and a great leader. So character and culture, you get those two things online and you will get a performance on demand team of people like no other. And that's when I work with groups, those are the two things I focus on. Because from that, I now have my superstructure to now put in this is where we can push mental toughness. This is where we can move your team to. This is where we can get them a part of the solution and away from the problem. Because when everyone's tied into the solution, there's greater buy-in.
Yeah. Do you find that people, when presented with higher standards and the right encouragement and that sort of performance culture, that people really do want that and will turn on to it? Or do you find that there are different segments of the population and some people just will never get there? Because I would like to think the former. I'd like to think that everybody will turn on. I don't know where I fall in my belief.
Okay, that's fair. I think the term is everyone. There's the hiccup. It's not everyone. Everyone's not going to, but most will, because in every group of people, there's always a couple detractors. Every group of people I've ever worked with, there's always one or two people. They don't want to move. They don't want to change. They'll work they'll actually work twice as hard, put in way more effort to hold everything where it was than actually just shift gears and move forward. Yeah, not everybody embraces change. Hell, some people don't even survive change. They'd rather just not have it. Why can't we just stay the same? And that's not the way life works. Nothing is ever going to be the same. We work hard on that, but that's just not the way of it. So at the end of the day, you have to look at the predominant part of your group. How can I get them there? And then you look at the people that are holding back. Okay, now, once I get the whole group moving, how can I close the gap and get these people on board? How do I get my buy-in? And sometimes, inevitably, if it's just one or two, sometimes it's about culling the herd and taking someone out of the team or shifting gears, putting them into a different team where they are happier and more productive. Sometimes it's simple as that.
Yeah. I guess it kind of leads into a question that was in my head, which is, when do you know that it's like, when do you stop investing in somebody and just cut them out of the organization versus like, when do you build into people and really try to help them get where they're trying to go? Like, how do you know when you've kind of done all you could?
Well, that's actually, it comes down to creating standards. So with standards is a metric, you're either above the line or below the line. But if you have a person that's consistently below the line, despite mentorship, despite coaching, despite extra help, there's your metric. If you've hit a threshold that there is literally nothing else I can give this person, the question needs to be, can I move them into a different location that makes them productive? In which case, that's a conversation you need to have with them of where do you think you should be here? Have that conversation, because you'd be surprised what they may say to you. Then it's either that or it's time to go. And see, that's the hard part. That's where mental toughness is. It's funny. Sometimes it takes an act of mental toughness to say the hard thing. Do you know why hard conversations are hard to have? Because they're hard. They're difficult. No one wants to have a difficult conversation. But the moment you change the word and you go, let's have a courageous conversation. Let's have the courage to put our cards on the table and where do you need to be? That's one. The other side of it also takes an act of mental toughness to be kind. especially to some people that are disenfranchised or grumpy or just plain old assholes. Yeah. Excuse the vernacular.
We can swear on this show.
Just it always tends to leak out sooner or later.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about standards. And I was going to ask you that because one of the quotes that I had from you was have standards, not expectations.
That's right.
Can you explain the difference?
Oh, absolutely. Words matter, period. And we are I
say that all the time.
Words matter so much.
Yeah.
And having taught interrogation and interviewing, and it's interesting because people don't realize I can actually assess your mindset by your descriptors. So if you're giving me a series of negative descriptors, I can pretty much determine where your mindset is. So the term expectation infiltrates our language in the corporate world, athletic world. I have a couple of clients that their mission statement is, we will exceed our clients' expectations. How? Now, an expectation, here's the Sean Bacon definition. So don't look in your Oxford dictionary. You will not find these words. But it's basically an expectation is an assumption without the benefit of communication. I expect you to know better. An
assumption without the benefit of communication.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I expected you to know better. I expected you to be on time. I expected this done on time. I expected it done differently. You've either heard these words or used these words.
Got it.
And the number one emotion tied to an expectation is disappointment. So, here I am, half Portuguese and Roman Catholic, and my mother expected me to be a priest. So needless to say, she's disappointed. Okay. Now, a standard is your minimum level of acceptable success. And I'll say that again, the minimum level of acceptable success. It's a line. You're either above the line or you're below the line. Nancy McKay, one of my mentors, has this great talk about being above the line. Well, that's the line. It's the metric. That's why I do not, if you want a culture of excellence, do not celebrate mediocrity. Someone showed up on time. You give them, hey, gave them a pat on the back. No, that was what you're supposed to do. That was your job.
That's the standard.
That's the standard.
Yeah.
Now,
well, that's
please.
Interesting because we often think of this I think we've bastardized the word standards too, which is like, we think of standards in work as the exceptional performance. We have high standards. You need to perform at this level, but then a huge portion of the organization performs below the level. And it's like, well, we need to get everybody to the level. Well, if people can't hit the level, then that's not the standard.
That's right.
The standard needs to be the minimum, like you talked about. And I don't know. I think I've seen conversations where people it feels like, well, we can't just say that they can perform there and that's okay. And it's like, well, no, we want them to perform better, but we need to set the minimum standard so we know what we're willing to tolerate or not willing to tolerate.
Exactly. And
is that fair?
Yeah. But the minimum standard doesn't mean a low standard.
No.
Okay.
But let's be honest about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And be clear.
Yeah.
Absolutely clear. This is the line. Now, if you want a culture of excellence and you want people to elevate the standard, then reward excellence. Here's a good example. Yeah. In our military, when we do an assessment, on the vertical part of the graph, you have all your competencies, communication, decision-making, leadership, On the horizontal, it's below standard, met standard, above standard, exceed standard. You get so many exceed standard, you start getting considered for promotion, advanced courses. There's a positive consequence to exceeding the standard. In the airborne community, exceeding the standards is where people, they will argue their assessment if it's met standard or above. Nope, it's got to be exceeded because that's the culture. However, below standard, you're below the line. This is an opportunity to educate, mentor, coach a person above the line. However, some people will do the same mistake over and over and over again. Well, despite all the coaching and mentorship. Well, now if you tolerate that behavior, you can quickly create a toxic work environment because you're literally acknowledging and accepting a lower standard from that one person, but demanding a higher one from everyone else.
Yeah. Then it's not the standard.
And then
anymore.
It's not the standard.
If you're willing to accept lower standards, then it's not, those aren't your standards.
Yeah. You can never lower a standard. You can change one, but you can never lower one. Otherwise you will create a toxic culture like in lightning speed. But if you want a culture of excellence, you got to give people a reason to elevate, a reason to be in a framework of excellence.
The other thing I've heard you say that I think is related to standard, or at least in my mind, these two were kind of correlated, is process over perfection.
Yeah.
Would you talk to that one too? It feels to me like these two are kind of related.
Oh, they are. Like, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And the problem with perfection, or being a perfectionist, is that you will try to wait for the most favorable circumstances to pull the trigger or do what you got to do. And what life does not work that way, will not give you that. So often perfectionists are fantastic procrastinators because they're waiting for everything to be ideal. Well, no. So a process is a journey. It gives you room for mistakes and errors and failures, and it gives you room to grow. And then as you consistently go through these processes, you gain mastery. Mastery still does not equate perfection, but you get more competent and confident through further processes. So like, I do calligraphy as a hobby, and calligraphy is very precise. I mess up all the time. I'm a long distance shooter. I have missed more shots in training so I can get the right shots done when it's needed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where process is so valuable. But we have been given a tremendous amount of permission and license currently. Well, we can wait and we can just get all these little things right and it'll look great. You don't need that.
Tying these two together, is it fair to say that when we think of the standards we want to put in place, we want to think about process standards, not outcome standards?
Sometimes they're connected. Sometimes
Okay.
You need outcome standards, like minimum level of success in terms of specific outcome, no less than this. And that's okay. Okay. But there's no magic number. Everyone has to, like, this is the perfect number. I love aiming at, like, I'm very goal oriented, mission oriented. I love aiming at something, having a North Star. Unfortunately, if you create this series of situations that demand an absolute perfection, you're going to get a lot of people very, very frustrated because they're never going to hit it. Maybe one might actually hit it. Most won't. And they'll become self-deprecating. Guilt will set in, shame, etc.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you kind of clarified for me, because we talk about process a lot. I do sales for a living.
Right.
We talk about having a process. It's not about getting every deal. It's having a process so that you get more opportunities, how you work those opportunities to put you in a position to win. Because ultimately, whether they pick you or not is out of your control. So you control the process.
That's right.
And then that gives you more opportunity to be good outcomes. And so, I was thinking more on, like, what are the process metrics that you want in place as the standard, right? Like, let's set some standards for what your process looks like. But to your point, those are kind of just mini outcomes for each step in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A great example, I was on a board of directors for an athletic not-for-profit organization. And my job, I was the director of risk, and I actually created the complaint protocol and the discipline protocol, the investigation protocol. And so we were getting all these complaints, but they were all over the map. So I created a document and a protocol. If you wish to complain, these are the things you have to hit for us to get your complaint and us to process it and get you an outcome that's going to be desirable for you. Now, one of the very first things was you have to be able to state the complaint and put your name on the document. You cannot have an anonymous document. Our complaints went dropped 99%. But we were still getting complaints, but the complaints were now very valid. They weren't just bitching. It was a proper formal complaint. There was a piece of accountability to it. So we had outcomes in the standard.
Yeah.
And then we measured it by its metric, its efficacy. We could now respond and correct or deal with those complaints in a constructive, productive, and efficient manner. And people, not always happy, but they feel satisfied that it was handled. That's one simple standard. In sales, I mean, you can have fantastic standards in sales. Not just where you want to hit, but how you're going to hit it, how you're going to communicate, how you're going to follow up, how you're going to create relationships. You can actually create standards on all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've kind of led into another piece, which with the complaints, which is, now you're taking action on them. So you've also talked about the importance of action-based cultures and problem-solving attitudes. You kind of mentioned it with the paratroopers, hey, you can't do that. Hold my beer. Watch me figure this out.
Yeah.
How do we foster more action-based cultures?
All right. Now, this can be difficult because we love to complain. We love to talk about problems ad nauseum. And the problem is not the problem. It's our perception of the problem that's the problem. Accountability is connected to action. What are we going to do about the problem? So one of my favorite things is like in parachute school, they'll give you all this training to deal with problems once you jump out of the plane. Because once you're out of the plane, it's you. No one's holding your hand. No one's telling you what to do. It's you.
You can't stop the exercise.
You can't stop it. And there's no half step out of an airplane.
Yeah.
Okay. I've tried it. It really hurts. Okay.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Like you have to commit to the void. So now you're there, you're accountable, you have to create solutions. So in the training, they will give you a problem and you've been working through what these different problems are because you work through the drills of it. But now they randomize it. They go, you have whatever the problem is. So you have a long linear obstacle in front of you. And then they follow up with this fantastic statement. Do something about it. Now it's up to you. Now you have to, you're pulling slips, you're pulling on your riser. You're either going left, going right, slowing down, speeding up, but you're making a decision, good, right, wrong, or indifferent. You're making a decision. That's the importance of action. Otherwise you're hitting it and it's going to hurt or be lethal. So life is that you have to make decisions. And the problem is we worry. Oh, is this the right decision? Guess what? You're not going to know until it's done. And if it's the wrong decision, guess what? You're going to learn. You're going to adapt. You're going to make it right. So when I had a teenage daughter and she would bring me things that had gone wrong, I'll say, well, what would you change? That was the number one question. What would you change? What would you do differently? The next question was, how are you going to make it right? Where's your solution? Where's your action piece? And then my favorite thing to say to her was, great, that's a great idea. Pull the trigger. Pull the trigger. Make it happen.
Yeah.
Because once that happens, now you're on a process.
Just start.
Action creates process. Yeah. And if you're going to create a solution-based culture, you got to get people's mindset away from the problem and into the solution. So one of the tactics I used to use whenever I get a new group would say, look, bring me everything. Bring me everything. Okay. If you've got a problem, if the unit's got a problem, if we're dealing with something, bring it to me. But I also want you to bring a solution in your hand that you've come up with. Because if you're bringing me a problem without that solution, it's bitching and complaining. I'm not here for that. However, I want to see the accountability. What kind of solution are you going to bring to the table? And interestingly enough, what it did do was people would come and say, I've been thinking about this. This is what I think we should do. And 9 times out of 10, it was a better idea than I would have come up with. They're the boots on the ground. They know it. And yeah, there were times I had to add or detract or suggest or even choose something different. But typically I stuck with what they had. On a rare occasion, a person would say, I've been thinking about this and I'm stuck. I really don't know what else to do. Perfect. But tell me what some of your ideas were. Well, I was thinking about this, but then this is the other problem. Great. I just wanted to see where you were. Now I'm in. So we need to get people having the permission and the license to bring solutions to the table. Some leaders, old school leaders, don't always allow that. And that's a big shift for us.
Tell me more about that.
Well, there are different styles of leadership, like especially old school leaders can be quite autocratic.
Yeah, command and control.
Yeah, well, here's that's a bit of a interesting conundrum. You need command and control no matter what leadership style you are. See, the trick is people think they have a leadership style. There's your first mistake. There are many different leadership styles. You shift gears according to the situation, what leadership style you need to bring to the table. For an example, crises, emergencies, autocratic leadership is the perfect leadership because we don't have a lot of time to talk. This needs to happen right now. Need you to do this. You do this. Get on with it.
Yep.
Now, democratic or participative leadership. Bring all your ideas to the table. But here's the funny part about democratic leadership. It's not a vote. We don't need consensus. I need all your ideas so the leader can make the decision. See, the burden of leadership still sits on the leader. Free reign leadership is really great with long-standing, well-formed teams with a high level of success. Here's your mission. I want it no later than this. Goodbye. And I get out of their way. You have great people. Let them do what they do. And the last is servant leadership. I'm here. What do you need from me so you guys can do the best work possible? I'm here for you. Now, when you look at those four, I shift gears all the time between them. There's no one style. Command and control is what is your authority as a leader to give people decisions. See, that's where people make the mistake.
Okay.
And now I'm stereotyping old school leadership as being authoritarian. But sometimes if you look like 1950s, even 1960s, I'm the boss. You're the follower. I don't want to hear from you. I just need you to do it. Here's my idea. It's the best idea in the room. Off you go. Well, that breeds dissension and it stems people's creativity where they know some of the answers that need to happen.
And almost always those aren't the best.
No, they're not. Not even close. But a great leader shifts gears. Okay.
Can you go through those four again?
Sure.
There's autocratic,
democratic, or also known as participative, free reign, and servant.
Okay. Interesting. I like that. And I like the difference between all of them because I guess I'd never really heard it broken out like that before. And I had been thinking about the value of servant leadership over the last year or two. I've heard some military leaders in particular talk about their job being just to make it easier for their teams to achieve their mission. And I just thought, like, isn't that just a great framework for leadership? But to your point, in a crisis situation, that might not be exactly how you have to do it. Yes, sure, you have to make it easy for them to get their mission, but you got to get in there and you got to tell them exactly what to do in a more autocratic way. So, okay, yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
you can hear this is me playing with it in my head.
No, this is good. This is good.
Yeah.
See, the biggest error we're seeing in corporate Canada, America, UK, EU, doesn't matter, is people become leaders because they're great doers or great producers. And they have great educations or great experiences, but they've never been formally given any practical leadership training. Whereas the military goes, I don't care where you're from. Okay. I don't care if you're from a small town in Louisiana or you're from LA or you're from Toronto. No one cares. We're going to give everyone leadership training.
Yeah.
And then they force you to use it.
Yeah, that's an incredible part of the military. I've had on a couple gentlemen from West Point who were West Point grads, and that was one of the things we talked about is day one, you are seeing examples of leadership. You are given opportunities to lead and fail and learn. And like by the time you graduate from that institution, you've had so many repetitions at leadership that, like, of course, great leaders have come out of that institution.
Of course. And here's the interesting thing. If you go to any bookstore and you look leadership, you'll find it under business, but quite a bit of it's written by former military leaders like Colin Powell, for an example, or General Mattis, who bring this real beautiful wisdom to the table. And it is transferable skill sets. Leadership is transferable. You can take a great leader and drop them in any environment, whether they know the skill, the industry or not. They can get the right people into action very quickly while they learn where they need to be. That's the art of a great leader. Yeah. So anyway,
let me ask you a question, kind of a segue off of this.
Sure.
You had mentioned in the prep call that we did something to the effect of, if you're going to be an Olympian, you have to act that way from the beginning. Can you expound on that a little bit? Because I think that's an important part to what we're talking about here too. I think people wait for the opportunity to be a leader, or they wait for the opportunity to be mental tough or to be a high performer. Well, when I grow to X, then I can do these things. But I don't necessarily believe that to be true. And I'd be curious on your take.
Well, here in Canada, hockey is everything. I'm not a hockey player. I can't even skate. However, I'm a bit of an anomaly. However, having worked with many of them, this is the lifelong dream of every young hockey player, is to get to the NHL. And so they're always trying to get to the next level, the next level, the next level, the next level. That's great. And sooner or later, you start to see these emerging athletes and you're going, where do you want to be again? NHL, right? Then why aren't you acting like an NHL athlete? Because when these people come to recruit you, they're not looking for a person that's going to grow into their position. They want a person that's going to show up and perform in that position and then continue to perform at that level for the rest of their career. Yeah. So you got to show up already thinking that way. And the only way you can do that is by acknowledging to yourself that I am at that level. Even though you're not, you got to start adopting the mindset. And that means also that engages your mental toughness, that I got to train a little harder. I've got to wake up a little earlier. I've got to do that little bit, find out do a gap analysis, figure out what you need to work on and start working on that. And that's how it gets there. So when you're dealing with, especially Olympians, God, amazing people, because the dedication, the drive isn't just physical. It is showing up at the Tokyo Olympics and going, I'm with my peers, and every one of these people are as good, if not better than me, and I need to perform right now. I got to think like an Olympian, and I got to act like one. Same thing. If you're if you're getting promoted and you're showing up, you better walk in and own your space. You better walk. You don't need to know it all, but you got to start thinking like the position that you're going to, aspire to.
Yeah. Be putting in the work to be getting to the place that you want to get to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it goes both ways. I mean, not just psychologically, but physically.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about physical for a second, because I was going to ask you this question in the beginning, and then we just got rocking and rolling.
That's all good.
I do want to ask you this too. When we talk about mental toughness, again, back to like the David Goggins example, we think about, when we say mental toughness, often what we think of is physical toughness.
Sometimes.
How, is that right? Should we be thinking that way, or should we be bifurcating the two?
It's interesting. There is a symbiosis between the two. However, they are separate. Okay. But in order to be physically tough, you have to have a certain amount of mental toughness, but you can be mentally tough and not have a certain amount of physical toughness. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So for an example, I do think it's very important to be physically tough, and being physically tough doesn't mean running 100 miles in Death Valley. It doesn't necessarily mean, sometimes being physically tough is surviving cancer.
Yeah.
Sometimes being physically tough is getting knocked down and crawling on the ground until you can stand back up. That's still physical toughness. But the physical toughness comes from your body. Your body is just the vehicle. Your brain's the computer. It's the engine.
Yeah.
Without that mental toughness, your body cannot truly become physically tough. So if you want both, start on the brain, body will follow.
Yeah. And I guess I had heard somebody talking about, I think it was specific to SEAL training, Navy SEAL training, and about the rise in popularity of the major beat down boot camps, thinking that this is going to make us better business people, right? If we can endure, we should be enduring these great physical challenges because that's going to make us better at business. And it was the SEALs are high performers. They do that training because they need that training for their job. You don't need that training to be a salesperson. You don't need to be able to run yourself into the ground like that. There's other things that you need to be building, competency specific toughness or train, skills. I guess, What's your reaction to that? And is there anything that is there any way to be helping folks who want to improve in their day-to-day lives or in their business lives who aren't military veterans and aren't going to be building the skills that are appropriate for them and what they need so they can still be tough?
Right. Well, let's start with the fact that the SEALs volunteer to go through that. But there is also the answer. They make a choice. They make a choice. And that when you go through their training, it's not so much about failing, it's about quitting. So you don't choose to fail. You can get everything right and still fail, but you do choose to quit. And in their program, ringing the bell, I'm done. Yeah. You make that choice, but you also make the choice to show up. You make the choice to be there. Now, I'm not a SEAL. I don't pretend to be one. However, the one thing we can learn from them is that, as I said, what choice are you making that's going to make a difference? That physical toughness can manifest in a different way. It could be skill toughness. It could be a tactical proficiency in selling. So that intelligent toughness. Okay. You see where I'm going with this. So either way, you're going to have to make a choice. And that's the one thing the SEALs do bring to the table, but you don't need the physical beatdown. This brings me to my second part.
It's the commitment. It's the choosing to do hard things and the commitment to sticking with it no matter how hard it gets. That's the part we want to emulate, not necessarily Hell Week.
Everyone has a Hell Week. It just looks different.
Fair enough.
Everyone has a Hell Week. It just looks a little different. Because I have put athletes through something that looks like selection. And I've put them through the sugar cookie. And I've made them tread water for an hour and a half fully clothed. Just to show them how much it's really a mindset. Your mind, your body did the work, but your mind chose to get to the other side of it. Nothing builds a team faster than two things. Conflict. So if you think about the boot camp or the selection, that's conflict. The other is food. Okay. When people break, no, it's serious. When you break bread with someone, you build relationships.
100%.
So when I work with a group, I create a conflict for them. Then I insist that they break bread together. And then they start sharing stories. Oh my God, they'll start commiserating. They'll start asking deeper questions. And now you've got a team that has a relationship with each other. They don't always have to like each other, just like a family. But now they have a shared experience. That's why boot camps, which is so underrated because we're always looking at the elite level units. When you look at a boot camp, these are people from all over the nation, from all sorts of economic, backgrounds and ethnic diversities, et cetera, slammed together. And they have to tear all these people down to get them to a base level, and then they rebuild them. So it's this massive shared conflict. And they're always meeting at the mess hall, eating, going, oh my God, I don't know how I got through that.
Yeah. So I was not in the military. I was in a fraternity in college.
Very cool.
And there was some hazing that was involved. I think
Say it isn't so.
We're past the statute of limitations on that. But I was a fan of it. I mean, I was a believer in it, not in the drinking till you send someone to the hospital, nothing like that. But I do think we had to be up at 5 a.m, sometimes 4 a.m, cleaning the house, interviewing brothers. There were just things that we were made to do that were incredibly inconvenient. We had to do calisthenics at 5:30 a.m. in the basement. It sucked, but those are some of my best friends almost 20 years later. And I can remember doing the Hell Week, for our fraternity where they didn't let us sleep very much. Yeah. And I remember being in the hallway with one of my friends, and he was exhausted and I was exhausted, and we were doing some house renovation project. And there was just something about that experience that bonded us together. And he was my best man at my wedding.
Exactly.
We have that because we went through that conflict together. So I think we could be creating more healthy conflict like that, where you're not going to hurt people. It is healthy hazing, sort of, where you're not hurting people, but you are creating opportunities for conflict where people can then come together and form those tighter relationships.
I don't disagree with you in the sense that we have stepped away from conflict. We mitigate conflict versus kind of embracing it or finding a constructive use for conflict. Conflict is where people and animals and plants and environments grow in.
Yeah.
I mean, Mount St. Helens blew up in Washington State. Well, here we are years and years later and things are growing again. So that conflict created new growth. We need constructive conflict. That's how why do kids take sports? Because it's a controlled environment of conflict. And a point has to end up on the board. Someone wins, someone loses. So we learn how to lose gracefully and we learn how to celebrate gracefully, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we have stepped too far back from great constructive learning of conflict. I actually pick something every year that I'm deeply uncomfortable with, and I tackle it, whether I pass or fail, but I want to show myself as well as be a great example to my children that if I'm willing to take on my own conflict and challenge myself and be okay about it and learn and grow, so can you. And there's been...
Can you share what a couple of those have been?
Last year I took on 2, and only because of COVID, I was signed up for an event. I volunteered. A very dear friend of mine gave it to me for my 50th birthday. It's called 29029 Everesting.
Oh yeah.
And it was supposed to be held in Idaho, and then COVID hit, borders slammed shut, etc. And then it did the next year, and we couldn't go across the border. And then it was offered in Canada at Whistler. So we get a chance to do it. So we both trained for it. And I already had another uncomfortable thing to do that year, but that's okay. And to climb, so it was 8 elevations of Blackcomb Mountain in Whistler, BC. And it comes out, it's over 52 clicks. You have 32 hours to get it done in. It actually came out to 31,000 feet. There were 4 weather systems by the time you got to the top. On my 4th ascent, I got past the first aid station and misstepped and tore my Achilles. The same Achilles that I injured in my selection training years before.
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, I'm in trouble. So I went from an hour and 40-minute ascent, 2-hour ascent to a 3-hour and 40-minute ascent. And it's getting dark. So I get the next aid station and I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm hurt, but if someone could look at it, maybe tape me, I'll carry on. I'm prepared to carry on. I just need a little support. They're going, no, you'll be fine. Walk it off. Okay. So I figured out this is the way it's going to be. And the sports sciences station was at the summit. So I had to deal with that ascent injured, but it taught me so much I hit wall after wall after wall after wall after wall, and I wouldn't stop. And I get to the top, the physio saw me, and lovely girl from Chicago, and she goes, do you want the truth? I never understood why people ask that. Do you want the truth? No, lie to me. Anyway, yeah, give me the truth. Yeah, she goes, you're done. And I went, okay. So I stayed, supported my teammate. His name's Jim Cressman. And even though I failed, I was really proud of the fact that not only did I finish my ascent injured, that I could really own it, both the failure and the training that went with it and all of it. I could just own all of it. And I know how much more I have to give because of that.
Yeah.
Then when I healed, after 19 years of not riding, I redid my motorcycle courses because my son got a motorcycle and we could ride together. And I won't lie, it made me very uncomfortable. So it was a great year, a lot of growth. So yeah. And I do that every year.
I love that. And actually that 29019 or whatever it is has been on my sort of like vision board for a little while. I saw that. It looked like a really interesting event.
Oh, it is. It's incredible.
Yeah. I may be not too far behind at some point if I can rope some friends into doing that together.
Yeah. Let me know. I'll be happy to help in any way I can, but you will be tested.
I don't doubt it.
You will be tested.
Yeah. I'm getting back to the point to wrap this up in the conversation we had earlier. I've shared this on another podcast episode talking with a psychiatrist about how I went through the pandemic and we for a lot of factors wound up very depleted emotionally and physically. And I just needed, I tried, once the pandemic ended, I tried to keep running again. And what I realized was I had kind of used up my mental toughness. And what I actually needed in that moment was to slow down, to take a break, to allow myself to physically sleep and recover, to emotionally like check out for a little bit. And I did that this year, 2023. And it probably took me 3.5 or 4 months. And then I noticed like my motivation started to come back and I started to engage again and I had more energy. And now I'm getting to a point again where I can feel like talking about that isn't like, oh man, yeah, someday maybe I'll get to, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, this is kind of fun. Like maybe I can get to this, and I can feel that energy coming back. And now I've got more to step in and now I want to take on those challenges again. And I want to get out and test myself again. And so it has been interesting to go through that, to kind of hit that wall, actually allow myself to recover and then feel the energy come back to be able to go out and do it again. So I believe in that now, having been through it, and I'm ready to push myself.
Well, mental toughness sometimes is self-forgiveness, like your ability to step back. There's times to push forward, and sometimes pushing forward means staying still because it's the best thing to do. It's what you need, not what you want. Yeah.
That's how you're going to get better.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Sean, I could let this run all night long and ask you questions, but I won't do that to you. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Any final thoughts that you have that we haven't covered that you wanted to share?
Invest. And if you want people to be mentally tough, be a great leader, be a great mentor, be a great coach. Invest your time in people and get them to be mentally tough by your inspiration. Lead by example.
Yeah. Can't lead anyone further than you've led yourself.
Damn straight.
All right. You heard it here. This has been fantastic. Thank you. And for those of you who are still listening, God bless you, and check the show notes. If you're interested in this, reach out to Sean. This is what he does for his business. So I'll put words in your mouth, Sean. I know he'd be happy to talk to you and see how he can help you or your team build more mental toughness, build more resilience, be a better leader, and get better outcomes. So thank you.
Thank you. It was amazing.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.